So, as a Christian, I believe that all of us have the image of God that's built into us, right? Not only did we live in a world that's created by God, but we live in a world where each of us are created in the image of God. And so that means that all of our passions, the things that we care the most about, are reflections of the God who made us, right? God made us to care about stuff. And the coolest part of that, for me, is that I rub shoulders with a lot of really, really interesting people. So this is going to be an Instagram series where I basically just try to grab interesting people and interview them. And the first person we have to be interviewed is Xandra Carroll.
Checking the blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Talking about myself.
Xandra, hi.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Here we are sitting outside for the very first Instagram interview. Xandra, you're a conservation biologist. Mm-hmm. You are a Coloradan. Mm-hmm. You are an apologist.
I am.
And what other things are you?
I am a very sarcastic person, and no, I'm kidding. I really do enjoy music. I play the mandolin, and I was in a bluegrass band for a long time, and I was also in a heavy metal band, but we try to forget about that.
Really? Wait, we try to forget about that?
Those were interesting days for me. I had a black faux hawk, if you can imagine that.
I cannot.
Well, there are pictures, but I will not share them with you. And I'm an artist, and I do a lot of sculpting.
So if you were to get your bluegrass bands and your heavy metal bands together for a jam session, what would that be like?
It would be like a very polite, considerate mosh pit.
That's amazing.
Probably.
Filled with people wearing flannel.
Yeah.
And also shredding on electric guitars.
Exactly. It would be incredible.
Mohawks.
Actually, this needs to happen.
I think it does.
Yeah.
Xandra, one of the reasons I wanted to interview you first for this series is that you lead such an interesting life. You've been almost everywhere. You've done almost everything. And so honestly, like narrowing down the range of things we could talk about is so difficult. But you really care about the environment.
Yeah.
You really care about conservation biology in particular, right?
Yeah.
That's how you've been trained. That's where your study is.
Yeah, that's right. I have a master's degree in conservation biology.
And you're here at RZIM headquarters to do a series, to take part in the series, one of our trending questions series on is environmental justice possible, right? So that's even that emphasis on the environment, that's why you're here. So tell us more about that. Like, where did that love start for you of nature and of the environment?
Well, one place that it started was in my childhood when I was growing up in San Diego, California. And I have very fond memories of my father taking me on long walks around the tidal pools and teaching me about all the animals there, you know, the sea anemones and the hermit crabs. And so from a very young age, I was enchanted by nature. And then as I grew a bit older, I learned about a lot of the problems that were happening, deforestation, degradation of the natural world. And that's when I started wondering, what can I do just as one person to help this problem or to stop the destruction that's happening? And that's part of what drove me into conservation biology, and particularly restoration ecology, which was my focus.
Wow. So restoration ecology, and I know you were in Papua New Guinea for a while, right?
New Zealand.
New Zealand?
Very close.
But you've been, okay, where have you been with conservation, like specifically with the ecology part of that? And like, what are some of the things you've done?
Yeah, so my focus is in birds and learning how to keep birds at a stable population instead of allowing them to decline. So part of this looks like translocation, where you take a whole population of birds, or a whole group of birds, like a whole family, and you move them into another location where they'll be safe. One example of this was when I was working in a mainland island that had been overrun with rats, and the rats were eating all of the eggs out of the nests, and so the birds could not reproduce properly. So I had to wait until spring and get recordings of the families calling to each other, and I used those recordings to draw the whole family in to a mist net where they were safely captured and taken to a new area where they could be released and repopulate. So that's a big part of what I did for my research.
So you
Yeah.
speak fluent exotic bird language.
Yes, it's a bit complicated. I'm still working on my accent, but yeah.
Okay, so what are the moments for Xandra Carroll where you feel the most alive?
You know, I think being in nature is a place where I really feel alive. For me, it's often an act of worship. For example, yesterday I was sort of sad, and I got some bad family news, and so I just went for a long walk down by the river in the forest here in Atlanta, where I am currently, and it was very healing. And there's just something about nature, I think, that shows that human beings really were created to be involved with nature as opposed to segregated from it.
We were at University of Florida together, and I love traveling with you, Xandra, because you notice stuff like that. And I think a lot of us go around, like I feel like I've lived so much of my life in just a concrete jungle. But you notice the nature around us. Mm-hmm. And I'm reminded of one moment at University of Florida where you pointed out a tree. We were having just a meeting on campus, and you actually pointed out a tree that a bunch of the students had actually walked by like every day and hadn't even looked twice at it. But you pointed this tree out, and I remember you having just some profound point. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. Yeah, it was a beautiful tree, and one of the limbs kind of came over the walkway, so you'd have to walk under the limb each time you went by it. And yeah, I love that tree. It's so huge and beautiful. But one of the things I had mentioned in a talk that I gave there at University of Florida is that people have a misconception about trees, where they look at what's above the ground and they say, well, this is a tree, but actually that's less than half of the tree, because more than 50% of the biomass of a tree is underground. So as much as you see with your eyes, there's even more of that just beneath the surface. And I think this is a bit like reality, where we see with our eyes a lot of what's going on around us, but there's this whole other story just beneath the surface, and we often undermine our own understanding of reality by not allowing ourselves to see the whole picture. We only see what we can with our eyes. So a bit of a philosophical experiment there. But
yeah, a lot of your work in apologetics and where that overlaps with biology and ecology is talking about questions of intrinsic value.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Tell us more about that. Like, how do you balance questions of value as you're looking at the natural world?
It's interesting to me because conservation biology is the only scientific field that I am aware of that is completely based on value judgments. We don't preserve something that we don't see as valuable. And so as I've explored conservation biology from both a scientific standpoint and from a philosophical standpoint, I've come to a lot of thoughts and ideas about how we value nature and also how we value ourselves. And one thing that I find really compelling about the Christian narrative is that God created his creation with inherent value. Inherent, maybe you're thinking that sounds a bit like the word inherit or inherited, which is the same root. It means you've been given something, you didn't earn it, it belongs to someone else and they gave it to you, right? So our value comes from our Creator, from God, and the value of nature comes from him, and it can never be changed. But we often value each other and nature with a different kind of value, which is called instrumental value. And this means I'm valuing something for what it gives me or for what I can get out of it. A lot of people approach nature as some sort of machine that they're trying to get a product out of, as opposed to something that we're meant to nurture, care for, and protect. So I think coming back to the Christian idea of stewardship and coming back to the Christian idea of inherent intrinsic worth will really change the way that we view nature.
Man, yeah, that's such an interesting point. And I've loved hearing you actually speak on that, in part because we just got to be honest that it's a little odd. Often when people think about tree-hugging, nature-loving Coloradan bluegrass playing ecologists, they're not thinking of Christians.
Right. Certainly not.
And I do think that's a bit of a tragedy, but I can see where those conversations have landed, and there's certain political and ideological battle lines that have been drawn.
Yeah.
I mean, do you find it odd to be a Christian and to hold this worldview, or do you feel like it's an easy synthesis for you?
For me, it makes even more sense. It makes way more sense. So you're right that there have been these lines drawn, political lines or ideological religious lines have been drawn. But at the end of the day, when I come back to Genesis and I read what God said to Adam and Eve with regards to how they were meant to approach the garden, how they were meant to approach nature, to care for it and to nurture it is the word that's often used. I see that this is a mandate for the human race. Regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of your background, regardless of your political views, our job as human beings is to care for and nurture the natural world. And a lot of people find this idea offensive because it puts us above nature, right? If we're stewarding it, if we're having dominion over it, if we're managing it, there's sort of this idea of hegemony that I think is off-putting to some people. But the truth of the matter is, if we're going to take responsibility for our actions in nature, then we have to view ourselves as not being nature, as other than nature, right? So just to take you down a slight philosophical rabbit trail here, let's assume that I am nature, that I am in nature, right?
Right.
If I all of the propensities that I have as a human being to drive other species to extinction, to pollute the natural world, to be selfish, and all these things are simply a product of my genetics and the way that my genes have evolved over time by a natural process, then I can't hold myself accountable for doing those things. I can't hold myself accountable for those behaviors, because you could say that they're just natural behaviors. Right?
Right.
However, if I am other, if I've been created above or outside of that for a specific purpose, but still attached to it, but outside of it, and I've been given this specific mandate by creation's creator to care for and protect nature, then I have responsibility. And for me, conservation biology makes a lot of sense in the viewpoint, through that lens and that framework of Christian stewardship.
Yeah. Man, yeah, that's such a refreshing perspective.